Hola chicos. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you about por and para. Now these are two prepositions that um, if you ask somebody what the word for is in Spanish, a lot of times you'll get either one of these words, por or para. So you might hear them as por and para are both words for, as it kind of says here in these notes. I don't like to think of it as just that simple because as you're going to see as you go through these notes in this video, that really por and para have several different meanings, but they are used for lots of different uses. So por is going to have lots of uses, especially por, being that it comes from the Latin for several other prepositions, and it turned into just one preposition in Spanish. So it's used more often or with more uses than with para. Para is used also very often still, and it has lots of different translations as well. So calling it simply as for, it's the Spanish equivalent of the word for, is not really doing it justice. There's a lot more to por and para, and we're going to talk about some of the differences. So starting off, kind of helps to sort of compare them when we're talking about these movement, time, and action. Now, what I mean by movement is when you're thinking of the difference between when you use por and when you use para, is movement is when we're using por, we're talking about really how you travel, how things move. They go along something, by something, through something. Those are all uses of por. Whenever you say we're moving, we're going, through the city to get to a certain spot. The going through the city is going to be with por. Vamos por la ciudad. And if we're going along the shore, vamos por la orilla. We're going along it. We're going around this area, we're going near this area, by this area, through the area. All those are por. Those are the words we're going to use. Those equivalents in por. You notice how none of those words were for. They're all along, through, by, near, around. Those are with por. And para, now that is, you might think of it as for, but really it's probably translates best as to. When we're talking about movement, we're talking about the end spot, the destination. Where are we going to end up being? So when we were going through the city, our goal was to end up at our friend's house. Vamos por la ciudad, because we went through the city to end up there. Para la casa de mi amigo. Para la casa. That's the destination, the end spot. Oftentimes you might use the word a in there instead. Vamos a la casa de mi amigo. A la casa, para la casa, same thing. So the destination, where we end up, para. In the direction of where we're going to end up, that is with para. Time, so kind of comparing the uses of these prepositions, por is used when we talk about how long something lasted, the duration of this event, the duration of the action. I did this for 2 hours. Lo hizo por 2 horas. That's how long it lasted. Where we're talking about para with time, we're talking the deadline, when this is due. This is due tomorrow. Es para mañana. Okay. Action. So I don't like to use the word reason, just because I feel like that's a bit too ambiguous when it comes to using por and para. You could use the word reason with either one of them, but what we mean when we say the reason when it comes to por is we mean the because of, or due to. If you can kind of use the word because of this or due to this, you're going to use the word por instead. If your reason, this isn't along with what I have on the notes right now, but if you're using the reason for the, what's the purpose of something? What's the reason for it? That's a para one. So that's why I don't like to use the word reason with it. I would just stick with just, because of or due to. So In this example, it's on this page. Llegué a casa tarde por el tráfico, because of the traffic, due to the traffic. The reason for that is what they're getting at in this por el tráfico. Now, when you're doing something for somebody, an action that is done for someone, estoy preparando una sorpresa. I'm, preparing a surprise for Eduardo. He's the one that's going to receive the action here. This is done for him. We can kind of think of him as the recipient of this. Okay. So now that was just kind of a way to look at the difference between movement, time, and action between the two prepositions, because those are common uses for each of those. But we also have, I'm just going to kind of go down a list of uses for por and para, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of all the reasons we'll have por and para. I'll probably mention a couple other ones, but for right now, being that this is our first time going through these, figure it's kind of a good place to start right now what we have here, and I'll just kind of throw out maybe a couple other ones just to let you know if this isn't the final list. But for now, this is just our baby step towards more proficiency. So here we go. So we already mentioned that por is used with the por, around, through, along, by, all those that general locations, the general, wherever you're moving around a spot, by a spot, through a spot. I like to think of the means of moving, the means of transporting. I went through this state and this state and this state to end up at my destination. The destination will be para, but the way you get there is your por. So the general direction, the general location, por. Time, we talked about this already, the duration of an action, how long something lasts for. And again, you can see some of the translations for, during, in, action. So that's the because of, I did this because of the rain. We played inside because of the rain. We played inside due to the rain, por la lluvia. Also, you might translate it as on behalf of, and you can see the example to the right with lo hizo por su familia. She did it on behalf of her family, por su familia. So kind of like that, because of her family, but probably translate better as on behalf of her family. The object of a search. This is now a new one. We didn't talk about this one yet. The object of a search. So this is when you go to get something and that's what you're getting, and you're coming back with it. It's sort of, you might think of it as fetching. It sounds a little bit odd when you see the example given. Vengo por ti a las 8. I'm coming for you at 8, meaning that I'm going to, get you and take you back with me. Manuel fue por su cámara digital. He went to go look for it. He's searching for this. It's the object of the search. He's trying to get his digital camera and then comes back with it. So that's what I mean by fetching. Goes to get it and comes back. So that's a por use. It's a little bit counterintuitive because of para, we think of that's the destination, that's the goal. But when it comes to the object of a search, it's something that you're going to go get and come back with. We actually use the word por with it. All right, so the means by which something is done, that is also going to be with por, and you can see some of the translations by way of, by means of. And I actually already talked about some of the traveling words. Kind of goes along with that motion, where if I'm traveling through this state and through this state and through this state to get to my destination, I'm going to use por with that traveling. And you can think of that as the means by which something gets done. But you could talk about how you're traveling in the example given, por la autopista, traveling by way of the highway, or you drove there. So you went, viajé por Kentucky, por carro. I went by car, por carro, por coche, por tren, por metro, por avión. The way you get something done, the way you traveled. If you're communicating by, phone call, por teléfono. Hablamos por teléfono cada noche. But the way that it's communicated is on this. So the way you get things done. Nos comunicamos por correo electrónico. We communicate through email. Por la charla, through the chat. Exchange or substitution, number 6. This one would just be in place of this. I'm going to give you this and you give me this. I gave him money and you gave me an MP3 player. Sure, we're all hoping that we can get one of those one day. This must have been made before smartphones took over. But anyway, they're giving something for something. Oftentimes we use it when we're talking about money. I'll give you, even if it was a specific dollar amount, I'll give you $30 for that shirt. Voy a pagar $30 por esta camisa. And then whenever you want to use the word per, per hour, per minute, per second, we use the word por. Okay, now, like I said, there are more uses of por I didn't talk about. But this is just going to be our focus for now. You're also going to use por when we use the passive voice. It's the agent of the passive voice. This was written by Dr. Seuss. This was painted by Diego Rivera. This was designed by Gaudi. This was, whatever. That is we're going to use, it's a passive voice. We don't know that construction yet, so it's not all that practical right now. But it is the reason why when you see any work, like a book, you would see it as por Marquez, por Dr. Seuss, por Cervantes, by Cervantes. Like in English, we would see a book and you'd see by and then the author's name. That's the Spanish equivalent of that would be by, would be por. So that's passive voice. Again, it's not listed on here, but it's another use for it. I'll throw in the gracias por, because it's so common, but gracias por is, you can think of it as a substitution or an exchange. I'm giving you thanks for what you did. Gracias por ayudar. Thanks for helping. You helped and I'm giving thanks. Sort of, you can think of it like that, or just know that it's a common expression to use gracias por. Okay. Another one I can throw in there right now is multiplication. I think this will come in handy soon. When we're talking multiplication, that's times. We will use por when we're saying like times, so like 2 times 4, dos por cuatro, dos por cuatro. And let me actually try to write this out here real quick. And I think I should be able to right here. If I were to write like dos por cuatro son ocho. Right here, that X right there, the times, the multiplication symbol, in Spanish, that is por. So oftentimes you'll see that this X here as a, that is por, and you'll see that in shorthand in like text messages, and you'll see por, and then, cierto. Sorry, I'm not going to fit it on there, but por cierto, that means by the way. That'd be like our BTW in English. BT dubs or BTW, you'd write that out in a text message, by the way, and that's the Spanish equivalent would be, ex cierto, por cierto, because the X is representative of the word por. So that's kind of fun. And let's move on to the next one. I think we have some phrases coming up here. Yeah, these are just common expressions. They don't really fall into the categories, and that's not necessarily, you can see around here, por aquí, that does go along with that general location of something we talked about earlier, through or by a place, por aquí, around here, that makes sense. But just a real common expression, similar to gracias por ejemplo, for example, por eso, por fin. All right, now let's get into para. We talked about the first few already, but let's review those. Para, we're talking about the destination, where we want to go. Oftentimes it means to or in the direction of, where are we going to end up? The way we get there is going to be por, but where we end up is going to be with para. Salimos para Córdoba el sábado. We're leaving for there in the direction of that spot. That's our destination. We're leaving to there. Deadline, this is due by Friday. Es para el viernes. Number 3, the purpose or the goal. So this is, again, reason. I think reason oftentimes can be used with this one, and reason can also be used with when we had that because of use with por. So I don't like to use the word reason, but this is the one that it gets mixed up with. So I like to think of it instead of the purpose or the goal of doing something, and you might say in order to. So Juan estudia para ser mecánico, or just yeah, well, I would throw the para ser in there. In order to be a mechanic, just that's the goal of him studying. He's studying because this is what his purpose of him studying is. This is the goal of the studying, to be this, para ser. If you can say in order to, you're going to use para, and it'll always be followed by the infinitive with it. When you're talking about a verb. So always the para plus, and it's actually either one of them, por or para, followed by an infinitive. There are sometimes you'll have a K maybe after it, but general rule there, if you are going to have any verb to follow por or para, you're going to use the infinitive form. That's an absolute rule. You're always going to use an infinitive after a preposition. Just sometimes you might have to use you might have a para que or porque and then a conjugation, but por plus infinitive, para plus infinitive, if there's nothing breaking up those two words. All right, so purpose, another reason we would say the purpose of something is also like, what's the use of it? This is a tire for the car. Es una llanta para el carro. This is a game. Es un juego para niños, for kids. It's para niños. That's the purpose of this game. The recipient, who is this going to? This is a gift. This is para mi hijo, para mi esposa, para mi amigo, para la clase, para señor. Those are all with para. This is going to that person. Again, you can kind of think of it as destination as well. Comparison. So like this would be with an opinion. You might think of it as, you can look at the examples, are pretty good examples here. Para un joven, so like for a young person, comparing him to other young people, es demasiado serio. For a young person, he's pretty serious. And that is with, comparing this person to other young people, he's a pretty serious one, comparing him to other people. And then opinion, what I mean is oftentimes you can replace the para mí with en mi opinión, or para ti would be en tu opinión. So para mí, in my opinion, is really what this is. This is, for me, this lesson isn't difficult. Esta lección no es difícil. Para mí, esta lección no es difícil. For me, this lesson isn't difficult. You might say that as, in my opinion, this lesson isn't difficult. So para mí, again, more or less, it's a synonym with the phrase en mi opinión. All right. And then in employment of, Sara trabaja para Telecom Argentina. She works for that company. That is her employer, para. Now, in, whomever you work for, you'll use para with that. Now, you could use por with, trabajar. You could say, with, yo trabajo para Señor Sánchez, and I work for him, meaning he's my employer. But I could also say, yo trabajo por Señor Sánchez. And in that case, we wouldn't be wrong to say that. It just means something different. If I work for him as he is my employer, it's para. But if I use por instead, what I mean is I'm working in place of him. I'm basically substituting for him. I'm working in exchange. I'm going to work in his stead. So I'm going to use por. I would use por in that case. So sometimes you're going to be able to use por or para depending on the context. And here, this is what we're actually talking about. In fact, that bottom one, trabajó por su padre trabajó para su padre is probably a better example than my Senor Sanchez one, but very similar. He worked for his father, in place of him, in exchange for his father. But in this context, we're not saying that his dad is his boss, but here we are. The para su padre, that's his father's, his employer. So sometimes, this is not always the case, but sometimes you can have either or, and you're not going to be wrong, but it might change what your intention is. So it is important to know all these uses. We'll build on as the years go on. We'll add on to more uses, and you'll get more used to some of the phrases that are also used with por and para. And but it does take a lot of effort. I don't think I've ever seen the same set of notes in any place. I've seen so many different notes in different textbooks and online resources and all over the internet. And I don't think I've ever come across the same list twice when it comes to when to use por, when to use para. So this is a pretty confusing topic. There's lots of uses that go with it, and it's really hard to find the same consistent pattern. Sometimes you'll see uses thrown in together. Sometimes you'll see them separated. Like today we had with with para in the right here. Sometimes you'll see this as, comparison as one use and then opinion as another separate use. So, when you're going to look around, you're not going to find a matching set of notes that I have here. Even this is from our textbook right now, but I brought in some information from other sites, trying to keep it still somewhat simple. But really, this comes down to just, studying the uses for each of them, por and para, and it does help to kind of try to compare them. When I'm talking about the movement, the time, and the action. When do I use por when I'm talking about movement? When do I use para when I'm talking about movement? And that's when you think, okay, por is the way I'm getting somewhere, when I'm going around somewhere, along, by, through, but para is where I end up as I'm moving. Time, how long something lasts is with por, and when it's due, when the end of this timeline is the para. Yep. So this is going to take some effort if this is your first time going through this. But be patient. It's not that difficult. I don't think there's as much gray area with this one as there is with some of the other ambiguities in the language, like ser and estar might be able to have a little bit more gray area, preterite imperfect, a little more gray area than this. So, study these uses, get familiar with them. And I think, look at this video if you understand all the uses in this video. It's going to take a lot of practice, and then you'll be off to a good start.